Funding for Building New York is provided by First American Title Insurance Company of New York.
Welcome to Building New York. My name is Michael Stoller. There are very few developers in New York who are female. There are very few developers who came out of banking. And there are very few developers who have done such a great job in changing the face of New York. I'm fortunate today to have Veronica Hackett, managing partner of the Clarett Group. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, it's interesting. You grew up in Vero Beach, Florida, the home of the Dodgers.
Absolutely.
And you were telling me that your family were like the first people to move to Florida?
Well, I go back very deep roots in Florida with my mother's family. She was considered one of the original 100 families of Florida. So the trace was to the Spanish soldiers who came via Texas, Louisiana, moved to Florida.
And you were one of 7 siblings.
7.
And the oldest.
Yes.
And what happens is Vero Beach was right near Cape Canaveral. And
That's true.
And at that time you had this desire to be involved with history?
Well, my mother's family and my father were always a little political. My dad was a lawyer. My mother was a psychologist. But when the Sputnik went off and the space shots started taking place, we began to have fire drills at school whenever there was a space shot, so we could go outside and see the shots. And our education basically became math and science oriented at that point.
And during high school, you took a typing course, you told me, right?
Well, my dad made a deal that he'd give me a summer job if I took typing, which actually did me well. I managed to be a legal secretary through college.
And you played golf and tennis? No, golf, you told me, right?
Well,
you were one of the top 10 golfers? There weren't that many. It was like me
right, there were only
tennis.
10. There were 10 of us. But in a small town, and it's a very typical small town environment where it's a very Friday night football and sports is in a local, one movie theater and a drive-in, and that's entertainment. So if you're not sports oriented, it's kind of hard to find anything to do. So my family being reasonably competitive, we all did a little bit of sports. And
so you leave Vero Beach and you go to Baltimore, Maryland, to the College of Notre Dame.
That's
Why
correct.
did you go to the College of Notre Dame?
Well, I knew about the College of Notre Dame because I was the first third-generation attendee.
So your
my
grandmother
mother
went?
And my grandmother had gone. My father's family was from Baltimore, so I also, on his side, had deep roots to Maryland and to Baltimore.
Now, when you were at the College of Notre Dame, what was your major?
Started as a math major. Quickly found theoretical math was beyond me, and my political interest, I studied history and economics. Graduated as a history and economics
and
major.
You were near Washington, and it was...
Well, it was Jack Kennedy.
Jack
we were
Kennedy.
all very politically active. We went to, we slept on the streets of Washington the night he died, so we all tragically remember that day.
Now, very few people would realize that one of the top 15 developers of residential housing worked for the CIA.
Right.
Now, you graduate college and you decide to go to work for the Central Intelligence?
They paid more than anybody else. As an economics graduate, I got a little bit better than a college graduate. This was also the days of if you wanted to be a teacher or a nurse, and as a female, one didn't think about too many things other than that. I thought about law school most of my life growing up.
So you spent a year, and then you come to the Apple.
To the Big Apple.
To the Big Apple. And you start working in the stock, in
Wall Street. Wall Street. Started out as an administrative assistant to the head of a corporate finance department of a firm that was subsequently merged into Merrill Lynch. And I guess it was August when I got the job, and NYU Business School was downtown at the time. Asked me to do a comparative analysis of, I think it was a mobile home company, because it was an IPO analysis. And
but why did you decide to go for a master's?
Well, because I didn't know anything about finance. I didn't, had no accounting background. I had my math background, and so I needed to understand accounting and kind of fell into finance. It was my niche.
Now, while you were at NYU, you were working in the Goodbody & Company, and then you went to another firm
Right.
that went out of business.
Went out of business.
And then Veronica Hackett is unemployed, pursuing her master's. And what happens then in your life?
Well, I approached Citibank and approached them because they had an SBIC, Small Business Investment Group, and I thought it was similar to what I was doing. And I asked them for a job, got an interview, and they said, well, we're not hiring there, but we're really looking to hire in the real estate division. Would you be interested in joining our real estate group?
Now, this was strange. You had no idea of real estate.
I didn't know what a mortgage was.
Citibank never had a female in the real estate division.
Right.
And you come over here, and what do you know about real estate? What happened? What was the first thing you did in real estate at Citibank?
First thing I did at Citibank? Well, it was a lot of on-the-job training. We did have a couple of courses, but it was very much on-the-job training. In those days, the bank, you sat in a big open floor, desk by desk, so we called it the platform. And I got handed an account. I was in the New York group, and we handled New York and New England, from New England to Mid-Atlantic.
Do you remember the first account?
I do. I really remember the first account. It was a company called Lee National. Alvin Dorman was the chairman. And I joked with him over the years that I just kind of sat myself in his office and his CFO's office, and they were in the business of making second mortgage loans. And basically quizzed him about, I was told, go figure out if we ought to renew this line of credit. And I kind of sat there and quizzed him and figured out what the business was all about. Early 70s.
And you spend about 4 or 5 years at Citibank?
That's correct.
And then you go to Chemical Bank.
Was recruited by Chemical.
And you're working at Chemical in the real estate department doing what?
Well, at the time, it was 1974, so we hit the middle. Shortly after I joined them,
one of the worst times in real estate.
One of the worst times. We called it the REIT crisis, REITs, and we formed a task force group to manage the REIT portfolio.
Otherwise known as the workout period.
The workout period, that's right. And we were both managing large credit facilities because the banks had 40 and 50 bank credit groups which had made loans to the banks. And we as Chemical, we also became very active in trying to swap unsecured debt for real estate assets. So I became very active in going out and looking at real estate assets all over the country.
It's 1976. The woman from Pensacola, Florida, ends up in London, right?
That's right.
You go to work Chemical Bank in London, and you told me that it was a very interesting thing. Besides working there, you really got your first hands-on experience by a property in Austria.
Correct. It was again a workout. I got a call from the general manager of the branch, and he said, I was doing country loans. And he said, we're about to own this piece of real estate in Austria, very unique part of Austria, accessible only from Germany, and a 1,400-bed apartment hotel they were about to become the owner of, and it was half finished. So I spent a year and a half, 18 months, commuting between London and Austria and various cities in Germany and Austria to get this building built, negotiate with the land commission, and get an operating hotel in operation. And I didn't speak any German.
You come back to New York.
Right.
You come back to Chemical Bank, and what are you doing now?
I ran 2 subsequent lending groups. I ran the Southeastern Lending Group, and then I ran the New York City Lending Group.
Where you met a number of the New York City players.
developers were all
and
customers.
Just before, okay, so what year was this?
1981, I think. I'm not.
No,
it was about 1981, and from 81 to 83, I ran Chemical's worldwide real estate owned, corporate real estate premises. So I was involved.
Leasing, buying
Leasing,
facilities,
right,
and everything.
buying facilities all over the world.
It's 1982, 1983. You're working with a developer, and you take a job. You decide why'd you leave banking?
Well, I think my experience in London had really taught me I ultimately wanted to be a developer. When I came back from New York, I also wanted to start a family. So I was kind of juggling the classic issue that so many women face of how do you do it all. So I wanted to do that before I made a move, and it was, I had a 3-month-old baby. I'm not sure that I would have made the move at the time that I made it, but the bank suggested that I take over the commodities division. And I really wasn't interested in running a commodities division. I'd been made a senior vice president by that time, but I didn't really care about becoming an executive vice president of the bank. I was really focused on real estate.
Now, you were one of the first female senior vice presidents at
Yes.
Chemical also. So it's 1983, and there is a developer by the name of George Klein.
Correct.
And George Klein has a company called Park Tower Realty, and he hires this banker who he
Right.
knew from banking. What do you do for Park Tower Realty?
I was an executive vice president, and I essentially ran, there were two of us, two executive vice presidents. I'll let you lead up to this, Michael. I ran the leasing, marketing, and finance part of the business, and Neil Klarfeld ran the construction and management.
Now, during that period of time, George Klein and Park Tower and you and Neil built a number of office buildings in Manhattan.
Correct.
499 Park Avenue,
Right.
Park Avenue Tower.
535 Madison, 33 Maiden Lane. We did some spectacular office buildings.
Yeah, but
throughout the
33
80s
Maiden
and
Lane
90s.
was interesting because it was one of the few new office buildings being developed in Lower Manhattan at
Right.
that time.
And-
Now, when you were with George, George was, I call him the visionary, and I truly believe he was the visionary because he entered into an agreement with some people who you've done business later on in your life with Prudential. You know, everybody really wants to know about Times Square. They see Times Square today, but you lived it. What happened in Times Square? What happened with George in Times Square?
I don't think we can cover this in,
Yeah,
in
no, we
20
have
minutes.
to do it in a minute and a half. But no, really, what
Right.
I mean, George.
George was a true visionary. I mean, George's vision was that Times Square could be transformed.
And you were a visionary because you were working with him, and I mean, you were involved with this. But
Right.
what happened? You bought the properties and.
Well, we were the bidder, and we were designated the developer. Park Tower was designated the developer by the city and the state, and we spent 7 years fighting 42 lawsuits to get it entitled. And throughout that time frame, we talked to every corporation about coming to the city, coming into Times Square, and ultimately, you can see what happened today.
But when you and I met, I said, "What was the turning point to Times Square?" And you said the turning point to Times Square was what? It wasn't the Disney store. It wasn't all the other.
You and I I disagree with some of the common theory that attributes the real turning point to Disney. I don't think the real turning point. I mean, I think
But the turning point to Times Square was all these new office buildings being built on spec.
There were 3 office buildings that were built on spec. And were subsequently, what stalled the Park Tower piece of the development was the recession of 89, 90. And throughout the 80s, we'd had several people who were committed to moving to Times Square, but large corporations need to make a time commitment. And because of the lawsuits, we were continually kept from being able to deliver the buildings in the time frame.
Now, your partner in Times Square at that time was the Prudential Life Insurance Company.
That's correct.
Which later on in career becomes more of a partner personally to you.
That's correct.
So it's 1992.
Right.
You decide that you want to leave Park Tower.
Right.
I mean, it was in the heart of the recession. The real estate, as we've seen, there have been cycles. The real estate market's terrible. And what do you do then in 1992?
Well, I spent a couple of years doing consulting, and I went back into the corporate real estate. I'd come out of corporate real estate, and I ran a supermarket real estate company's real estate division.
A small little supermarket, A&P.
Right. And I then ran a development operation for the parent company of the Woolworth Company and Foot Locker, most people know it by today.
And how do you make the change from a consultant? You were working for people. You work for the banks, you work for George, you may have had some equity, and then it's 1998, and Neil Clarett, your other executive vice president at Park Tower,
right,
who remained with George during the period of time, you and Neil decide that you're going to go out into business together.
Right. Neil and I were always really close friends, best friends. I view Neil as my best friend, and we had pretty complementary skills. And by this point in time, we thought that we could, the real estate market had changed so that there was a lot more institutional capital available, and we felt that we had the talent and the people to put together a team and get some institutional backing and do development on our own. So that's when we formed Clarett, 1999.
And Clarett was, you formed it for two reasons, right?
Two reasons?
No, I mean the name Clarett.
Oh, the name Clarett. Well, it's a good story. It was a play on words. His last name was Clarfeld, so he's the Clar and I'm the it, and we liked red wine, and we'd done some work in London where red wine, Bordeaux, is called Claret, so
and
we
on
thought
your
it was...
business card and most of the items you do have the red wine seal.
Right. And Neil's wife, Charlotte, sort of had always given us the idea if we would name our projects.
But you know what, it's still interesting. Right now, I mean, you and Neil made a living, but you never really, to become a developer, especially to be a female developer, it's 1998, it's not the easiest time. You go out there and try to develop. How do you decide to get in to develop a residential apartment houses? Because George's business was commercial, most of it.
It was. But development is a process, and development is managing a process and managing a team of architects and designers and construction companies. And we started out by one project at a time.
So the first project was on 38th Street.
The project called Montrose was in those days we could do rental projects, and we started doing rental apartment buildings. And there was at that point in time, it's hard to believe today, but in that point in time, there's a real serious shortage of talent in the construction of apartments because office buildings were deemed to be much more sexy and interesting to real construction gurus. I think it's changed because the market's changed dramatically. So we had a terrific reputation for having been really good at what we did at Park Tower and never having cost overruns and knowing how to design and build. So
So the first one's Montrose on 38th Street.
Right.
Then you go down to 23rd Street and you build...
We built a project called Luminaria. We formed a joint venture with a public REIT called Post Properties based in Atlanta.
Who you had known from your days...
From my days as running the Southern Lending Group. Everything goes around in this business. It's a really small business, a really small group of people when it comes right down to it. It's always surprising to outsiders as to how small the real estate industry really is. But we did a joint venture to do multiple projects with Post, and we did two projects, Luminaria and a property called Toscana on First Avenue and 89th Street.
And then how did you decide to, I mean, there's such a need in New York City for rental housing. How do you decide to go into the condominium housing?
Well, the condominium business is really, I think, was driven by land prices. The rental business is a lot less risky. On the risk profile of real estate transactions, condos are significantly more risk. But land prices were beginning to drive exponentially upwards.
And then you go to the Upper West Side. You go to 2770 Broadway.
Correct.
And you build
107th and Broadway.
107th in a neighborhood that people said, I'm not certain it's north of 96th Street, but that was a very successful project for you.
Very, very. We loved the neighborhood. There were a lot of people that thought we were overpaying for it, but there were two things that we noticed as we looked at the marketplace. It was a very strong family market. It was at one time viewed as kind of I can't remember what the word was, but there were students who went to Columbia who were warned never go south of 112th Street. But we had seen people move to that neighborhood for valuation and great transportation, and the site was unique on a wide open site.
Now, is this when you went into business with the people who you were once in business with, Prudential?
That's correct.
So
we,
Prudential is your partner?
We formed a joint venture company with a fund of Prudential, and we do everything through that entity. It's a little unusual structure because most people are used to real estate being funded by capital or debt on an individual project. We formed an entity called Clarett Capital, and so Prudential is a partner in that. We then also bring in other capital partners on an individual deal-by-deal basis.
And after 2770, you go to
We've now got,
the Upper East Side. I mean, a magnificent building. No, it's not the Upper East Side. It's 57th
the Upper East
Street.
Side. It is the Upper East Side. It's the beginning of the Upper East Side, 57th and 3rd.
Where have all the movies gone? You've taken the movie out.
We took away the
Sutton movie theater.
The Sutton movie theater, but you know it was dirty and rats running across it, and it's a beautiful new building today.
And that's going to open for tenants in what, 2 months, 2 to 3 months?
In a month. We'll close apartments at the end of the month. We're finishing construction. We've only have 3 unsold units out of 60, a little over 60 units.
And then you decided to go down to 29th Street. You wanted to deal with the church, right?
Right.
And you're building something called the Sky House over there.
Sky House.
It's a 58-story building.
No, 55 stories. It's a
When you're up 50, what's another 2?
It's a beautiful site. Our transaction was the Church of the Transfiguration, which is also known to a lot of people as the little church around the corner, or the Actors Church. It's got a very interesting history and a beautiful site. It's a landmark church set in a feeling of real English gardens. And so we have an agreement to...
Is that what we call Sophie neighborhood? I've heard this new term.
I call it...
South of 5th?
No, we call it Madison Square North. It's also where our offices are located. We're in that neighborhood.
And you're also doing something in Chelsea on 19th Street.
We're doing a project on Chelsea called Chelsea House. The same architect, Randy Gerner, who did our Broadway project for us, and Luminary. It's our 3rd project by Randy Gerner and his team.
And so you've been in all of Manhattan, and subsequently you're now going to Brooklyn? I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn. I like Brooklyn.
I was a Dodger fan, ultimately.
Okay. That's
I've
right.
been trying for years to get to Brooklyn.
So, now what are you doing in Brooklyn?
We're doing a 100-unit condominium project in the BAM Cultural District called, we've named it Forte, as in strong and vibrant. And we've just starting construction.
And how big is that building? I mean,
it's
height?
28 stories and a little over 100 units.
And that's really, there haven't been any real new apartment houses over there.
There's been one other, this is Fort Greene. I mean, of course, most of what you've seen has been in Dumbo and Williamsburg. There's been one smaller project in Fort Greene that was highly successful.
And all of a sudden, I know that you said you like the Dodgers.
I'm now a Yankee fan.
Oh, now
I'm a real committed Yankee fan.
Now that you're a Yankee fan, you've decided to do a very small 1 million square foot project in Hollywood, California?
That's right.
I mean, this is building in New York, but we'll briefly. So what are you doing there?
We're doing a mixed-use project. It's more horizontal for us. We did think we were going to do a lot more vertical when we started the project, but it's on 7 acres. And it was a New York owner, which is how we knew about the property, that we found out about the transaction and negotiated with the New York owner to do a 99-year ground lease. And so we're hoping to break ground early next year and do a spectacular project. We found that when we started the joint venture with Pru, we were hoping to be able to do a mixture of rental and condominiums. It's been virtually impossible to do rental
in this part of the country.
In this part of the country. Our expertise was New York. It's been virtually impossible to do rentals here in New York.
And now you're coming back to the Upper West Side.
Today.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you're building, this is on
200 West End Avenue, 70th and West End.
70th and West End Avenue.
Right.
And what are you going to be building there?
200-unit condominium project with retail at the base of the building.
You like the West Side?
I love the West Side.
And what do you see going on in the future? I mean, you've opened up an office in Washington and other places.
We, as a company, we're committed to these 3 locations. That's that's our expansion plan. We don't want to be in too many locations. I'm keenly aware of growing too fast and too furiously, and we don't want to be a national developer. We want to be focused and be a niche player and be really good at what we do. Be as good in LA and Washington as we are here in New York.
Would you say that most of the deals, even though you were saying when you worked for George and most of it was office, will you stay in the residential or will you gear to mixed use?
Well, I think we'll do more and more mixed use. That's the nature of the business. Office buildings are a different breed and a different animal in terms of having them financed. So I don't see trying to compete with the Vornados of the world and do office building construction, or the Brookfields.
You have a 23-year-old son?
Yes, 22.
22.
He's not in the business. Would never go in the business. He has no intention of going in this business.
Why are there so few female developers around the country and in New York?
Well, I think it's been a family business, and it's been a tradition of the sons going into the business. I do think when you look around today in New York, there are many more women of this new generation who are in the business.
The Rose family have.
Rose, the Zucker.
The Durst have, and the Zucker. So.
And I think you will see a lot more women around the rest of the country.
So you think you made the right decision by leaving the CIA?
It was a great move.
You're never going to.
I've never regretted it. That's for sure.
Never regretted it, and you've truly been to be the 15th largest developer of residential, and that number is going to be surpassed because that was a statistic of 2 years ago. I think you and your partners have really built a lot of great things for New York.
We have
some new buildings, some beautiful buildings, and since I walk around the city, I love looking at them, and I'm very happy that you've been here today with me on Building New York. Thank you.
I've got a great team. It's a spectacular group of executives.
I just wish you the best of luck and the continued success.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Okay.
It's a pleasure being here.
Funding for Building New York was provided by First American Title Insurance Company of New York.